please enjoy this ad-free episode as part of our Academic Integrity series sponsored by Pangram Labs, the world's leading AI detection tool. Try it out at pangram.com. That's pangram.com.
Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to Ed Up on the Ed Up Experience podcast, where we make education your business. This is Elvin Freitas, co-founder of the Ed Up Experience, and today I am back with me on another episode of our Academic Integrity series. My co-host with the most, he is Bradley Emmy, and he's the co-founder and CTO at Pangram Labs. Bradley, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Elvin. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic as well. And you know how I am. I'm going to get right into it. So I want to bring our guest right in. She's fantastic. She's been on before, so some listeners may have heard her before. She is Dr. Julia Christensen Hughes, and she's the president and vice chancellor of Yorkville University. Julia, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. One of my favorite topics.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate your time. We know you're busy, so let's get right into it. First question we like to ask everyone is, tell us all about you. How do you do and what do you do?
All right. Well, I'm president and vice chancellor, as you said, of Yorkville University, which is one of Canada's largest private institutions. So that sets us apart from a lot of my Canadian higher ed counterparts. We operate in 3 provinces in Canada, in British Columbia, Ontario, and New Brunswick. And perhaps what's most relevant to our conversation today, the majority of our students are learning online asynchronous graduate degrees. So that puts a whole nother spin on the topic of academic integrity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to follow up real quick. Before Bradley jumps in, how do you define academic integrity? And you can do it like from your personal one, because we know you have a historical perspective, and the institution as well, if you want.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, I've been studying this topic of academic integrity for over 20 years, and maybe one of your questions will prompt me to explain why I got interested in this topic. But to me, when you hear the term academic integrity, a lot of people think of academic misconduct, and especially the academic misconduct of students. And I really challenge that notion, although that's part of it. But to me, higher education plays an absolutely critical role in society. Essentially, what do our universities do? They discover and disseminate truths, and they confer degrees. And for the university to maintain its privileged position in society, it has to demonstrate an unquestioning commitment to integrity in both of those endeavors. And just think about what would happen if a university's integrity is questioned. People will stop believing the truths it disseminates, and the degrees it confers will lose value. So to me, academic integrity is absolutely has to be the core value of our universities.
Yeah, thank you for that. Very, very concise. I love the focus on the institution. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, it is the institution's responsibility to ensure that, there's trust and there's this culture, between teacher, students, and the university. So anyway, let's get started. So you've been doing research in this field for a really long time. And so could you just tell our audience, how you got into the research field of academic integrity, and kind of what, maybe this is overly broad, but kind of how has the research evolved over the years?
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that question, Bradley. So my doctorate is in the field of organizational behavior. So it studies the behavior of organizations and the behavior of people within them. And I was always interested in understanding the dark side of organizations, like what would cause an organization to act in a way where it wasn't demonstrating integrity. So I think I always had a natural interest in this subject. And then as a young faculty member, I was director of the teaching center at a university. So teaching the faculty how to teach, how to design effective assessments, this sort of thing. And the president came to me one day and he said, Julia, we have a problem. We have a problem of integrity. And so, of course, I was instantly intrigued. And he said, we have more students than ever before being charged with academic misconduct violations, and they are appealing, and their appeals are being successful. And so I was, okay, well, this is interesting. On what grounds are they being successful? And he says, well, the charge is inappropriate collaboration on their academic work, but the university has proclaimed our highest value to be collaboration. So the universities,
Something's wrong here.
the students were citing sort of the values or pillars of the university, recognizing that powerful learning happens through collaboration with one another, right? Debate, discussion, what do you know? How could you help me understand this? And yet the faculty were expecting the students to do their work solely as individuals, without any help, without any discussion. And so we sort of had this cultural collision happening between values. And Bradley, you shared with me you're a philosophy undergrad, so I think you'll appreciate, right, the challenge in, well, what's the highest value? Anyway, so he asked me to do some research and come up with a strategy for dealing with this. And so through my research, I came up with the name of Don McCabe. Now, I don't know if any of your previous guests have mentioned Don, but he was a business prof at Rutgers University. And he had been in the US military and was very concerned about what he was seeing as students who weren't behaving with integrity, with moral character. And he was very passionate about honor and wanted students to sign an honor code. Anyway, he ended up doing so many surveys at universities across the United States, publishing on the topic, and he founded the Center for Academic Integrity in the US that became the leading center for thinking through this issue and coming up with recommendations for universities that wanted to make integrity, again, like a core value. So Don and I collaborated. We did the first survey on academic misconduct in Canada because it was really focused on presenting students with a list of behaviors, asking them if they'd engaged in any of them, how did they regard each behavior, what did they think about that? And then we also surveyed faculty and graduate students on similar questions. And then it became this pan-Canadian survey because as I presented on our results, other institutions replicated it. And so it became the first pan-Canadian study on student misconduct in Canada. It made the cover of Maclean's magazine, which was one of our more popular magazines in the country. So forevermore, I became known as the person to speak about academic misconduct in Canada.
Oh, so when did this all happen? Like, when did the survey happen?
This was about 20 years ago. And so this was before artificial intelligence. So it was really interesting for me to reflect on the results and see the incredible shifts that have happened. So back then, 1% of students were saying they, downloaded a paper from the web, or 8 or 9% saying they'd paid someone to write a paper for them, much higher percentages saying they'd plagiarized, falsified lab data, or bibliography, used cheat sheets in an exam. So, the conclusion was about 50% of the students from across Canada admitted to some forms of academic misconduct. But I'll tell you, they also had the opportunity to write these open-ended responses. And I read response after response that caused me to coin a phrase: students cheat when they feel cheated. And it was such a powerful aha moment for me to read from these students saying, why wouldn't I cheat, like collaborate, if it's going to support my learning? I'm here to learn. Or if the faculty member is too lazy, I read the word lazy like at least 2,000 times. If the faculty member is too lazy to change the assignment, to change the exam, maybe the faculty member is teaching multiple sections or uses the exact same material year after year after year, students are saying, someone has access to this information. They're going to do better than me if I don't seek to have access as well. This is a competitive environment. We're competing for scholarships. We're competing for access to grad school. We're competing for jobs. And if the university will not provide us with a level playing field, we will do what we can to level it out for us. So it was so interesting. But just in general, I'll say there was a small percentage of students, I called them the abstainers, who reported never having engaged in any of that list of 25. There was a similar number who'd engaged in about every single one of them. So I called them the cheaters. And then there's this large group in the middle that I called the dabblers or the context-specific cheaters. So they largely brought a moral compass to their academic work, but if they didn't respect the faculty, if they didn't respect the the assessment approach, if they thought it was all rote learning, that they really weren't engaging in a transformational learning experience with a faculty member who really cared about them, they would use that to justify shortcuts. They're saying, I'll do whatever I have to do to get through this course and move on. I'm just here for the credit in that case.
Oh, that's so interesting. I mean, when we ask people like, how do you define academic integrity? Like almost everybody uses the word trust, right? They're like, oh, it's the trust between the individual and the institution, the trust between the student and the faculty. But kind of what you're saying here is like, what you found in that early research was that, the trust was already broken between the student and the institution, or the student and the faculty, even before the student, engaged in misconduct.
Oh, yeah,
Would you say
absolutely.
that's accurate? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and that they would be selective. Like the student, that there's no way they would cheat in one course, will happily do it in another. Like
Oh,
without qualm, right? It was context dependent.
huh. And did you feel that, like, where did that kind of breakdown of trust usually happen? Like, was it kind of like, was it something that faculty would say, or is it just kind of general, like, perceived unfairness of the course, or was it more tied to just like, oh, I'm not going to learn anything from this class anyway, and so like I just need to do what I got to do?
So I'd say all of the above, but of course I was gleaning this from the open-ended responses, so I can't speak to
Sure.
percentages, but I'll give you a range of examples. So engineering programs, the students typically take more courses, harder courses, or at least they perceive that they do, than students in other programs. So I would read responses from engineering students saying, our TAs deliberately taught us how to cheat. They said, you can't possibly get through the demands of this program, honestly. So here's how you do it, right? Here's how you divvy up the work amongst your peers and, again, collaborate on getting this massive amount of work done, because it's humanly impossible to do it solo. So you'd have that kind of thinking. Maybe at the other end of the continuum, it's students, and I already said this, but I'll just try and say it a little bit different or reinforce the point, that the way the academy is constructed, the prestige, despite all the rhetoric about caring about students and their learning, a lot of the prestige comes from rankings, and a lot of the metrics that drive the rankings is faculty research. So for a lot of faculty, that's where their standing amongst their peers comes from, right? Is the research they've published, the quality of the journals. So that is where the majority of faculty largely put their effort. And that means that their teaching role can often be quite shortchanged. Have they learned how to facilitate the learning of others in a pedagogically effective way? Or do they just show up to class, face the blackboard, chalk, mumble? So does the student feel that the faculty member is invested in them and their learning? And then it comes to assessment. Is the assessment perceived as fair? Is it going to give the student a fair opportunity to demonstrate what they've learned? Or does the student feel its assessment is game? That it's your ability, we say in this course, you're going to develop your critical thinking skills. You're going to develop, your ability to discern, to develop this, to develop that. But now you're given a multiple choice fact-based exam that truly is testing short-term recall. So when students perceive these massive disconnects, that's when they're more likely to say, this is a game. It's an unfair game. I just need to get through this.
That makes a ton of sense. I think, like, we talked about Trisha like before we jumped on, and like so much of her research is focused on like, the reasons why students cheat. And I think that's, largely it seems like it hasn't really changed so much over the last 20 years. But what would you say on that? Like, do you think that's been more or less a constant through your career?
Yeah, so I haven't done any survey research lately, but I've done some conceptual research, and I recently co-edited a book with Sarah Lane Eaton called Academic Integrity in Canada, an Enduring and Essential Challenge. And we had faculty and academic staff from across the country contributing to this book. And it was really, we were doing it during the pandemic, which made the project a little bit challenging. But so we did all these online touch bases with our contributors. And it was such an interesting learning opportunity for me personally to see all these different takes on this topic and the research that was underway in different institutions. So I'd say a couple of things came up. One was contract cheating, right? It's no longer that you have to meet somebody in a dark alley and pass them an envelope of cash, right? It's $1 billion business where students with, a quick online search, a credit card swipe, and they're able to purchase that paper. Now, what a lot of students don't realize is that some of those organizations actually reach back around and blackmail the students because now they have evidence. So it's a whole murky business. So when I originally did my study, that wasn't so prevalent. It's big business now. And then and I know we're just focusing on students here. I want to switch over to faculty in a moment. But the other thing, of course, is artificial intelligence. And I think this is so interesting. Higher education, and I know everyone's talking about it now, but I don't think we've fully realized yet the disruption that is coming. So what does it mean? I was recently talking to a faculty member from my former institution who I have all tons of respect for. She cares so much about her students, tries to do really interesting assignments, getting them to apply theory to problems in their actual life, show the deep reflection, get new insights, all of that. She says she now believes probably at least 80% of students are getting ChatGPT to do that assignment. And she's just thinking, what is the point? Like, what is the point of this kind of learning? And because of the financial challenges public institutions are facing, she says her smallest class is 200. Like, how can she possibly have like any sense of a student's natural writing style or their life situation? How can she give meaningful feedback? And so we actually now have the situation where students can submit work, faculty can submit grades without either having read the work. Like, isn't that crazy when you think about it? So again, what is a degree worth? What does it represent? And what kind of work has to go in to that, right? To that scenario. And I've got ideas on that, but I just want to say also what's happened since my study. I don't know if you've followed Retraction Watch. If you haven't, I would really advise you to Google it. Retraction Watch was begun in the US, and they track articles published in reputable journals that have had to have been retracted because of challenges with the integrity of the work. And they have their leaderboard, like faculty at different universities, mostly in the US, but also elsewhere, that have had the most number of articles retracted and on what grounds. It is shocking to me the number of articles retracted that have been found to have doctored images in medical and pharmaceutical type research. Over 500 articles to do with the COVID, to do with the pandemic, have been retracted. And here's the challenge with retracted articles. People will read it, build their work on it, and not even necessarily know it had ever been retracted. The other game that's happened is the rise of predatory journals, fake journals, and peer review cabals. So how in a time where people are told it's fake news and you can't trust any institution, and now there is this massive assault on the tradition of the academy of peer review in academic journals. It's another massive area that we have to wrap our head around and get control of. This whole notion of prestige through publication, is tempting faculty like the same way students get tempted, I believe. Now, I have to say, I imagine by and large, most faculty do have absolute integrity. I don't think they would have come into the academy if they hadn't. It's just like that distribution across the students, right? But the fact that like there is a massive assault underway on the integrity of the academy, and we need higher education leaders to be fully aware of that and doing all they can to defend it.
Oh, it's insane when you actually look at the numbers. Like, and not to make this podcast about Pangram, but like we've been working with like a major cancer research journal, and like since AI, like we've just seen this explosion in AI kind of assisted and AI enabled research fraud. Like it's
Yeah.
just like so tempting, and people perceive that they can get away with it. And, as a result, like look what happens. Like people are using AI to fabricate data, to write the papers, to fabricate images,
Mm.
and also to automate the peer review. And
Yes, exactly.
it's a total
So
moral breakdown of trust. Yeah.
yes, it is. It is. Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
Anyway, just didn't want to make sure we stay on track. So wanted to steer it back to faculty. So, we've been talking a lot about students, obviously. So kind of like where do faculty sit in this role? Because you mentioned before that like faculty obviously research is their main job typically, and teaching and learning is their, they perceive it often as charity work, right?
Mhm.
And so like how can institutions actually hold faculty accountable in that regard? In that, even though like, teaching might be a secondary priority.
Well, it's a great question, and I don't know if I'm the best person to answer it because one of the reasons I left my former public institution and joined a private university is because I wanted to prove that there is another way. So at Yorkville, for example, our graduate classes are rarely above 20 students. 15 is a more likely number at the undergraduate level. We have some that go as high as 40, but again, the average is around 20. So I'm a firm believer that learning is a collaborative activity, is to be facilitated, not lectured at. I mean, there's time for a brief lecture, maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes to position something, to present a theory, but then students have to do. One of the things we have at Yorkville that I'm really proud of is our signature learning outcomes that are really skills and values-based learning outcomes, because I believe it's when we support the facilitation of skill development that helps future-proof our students' careers. So if they learn how to learn, if they do learn how to think critically, how to discern fact from fiction, right? How to apply knowledge in meaningful ways to have impact, to be digitally capable, right? So we've got these learning outcomes that include a commitment to professional integrity and the concepts of sustainability. So for me, that happens best in a facilitated learning environment, more like an apprenticeship kind of model, where students are given tasks to apply and to do. And it's interesting, and the States was a leader in medical schools doing this kind of thing and shifting to competency-based education. So the idea is like, who wants to go to a doctor if they passed with a 55% on some fact-based exam? No, you want to know that your doctor is capable of doing. And ideally, because people don't usually do perfectly at first try, you have opportunity to repeat and to learn and to grow in that task. And most of higher education in the public system is not well set up for that kind of learning model. So I'm just a big believer in students having the opportunity to work while they're learning, so they have an immediate opportunity to test and apply, to build their confidence in the doing, to get meaningful feedback. Our largest program has an extensive internship program where our students are being mentored by professionals in that area and get that rich feedback in situ, in context. So to me, that's the future. But public institutions have to figure out how they're going to get there. But I'm happy to have the opportunity to be pushing the boundaries on these kinds of concepts at Yorkville.
Yeah, for sure. Like I remember like back when I was in school, like there was like this big like flipped classroom trend. And like it seems to have kind of like risen and like I don't know if stagnated or kind of died, but is this kind of the sort of thing that you're talking about, or does it go beyond that too?
Well, flipped classroom says, okay, so the traditional model, students come into a large 600-seat lecture theater. They listen to someone drone on for the hour, say, are there any questions? No, good, off you go. And now go and do the interesting and hard stuff on your own, right? So flipped classroom said, oh, for heaven's sakes, why don't we, do the podcast, do the lecture, capture, have students listen, read, reflect, and then come into class and do the doing. So I guess that part of it is similar, that the doing should be in the class, but I'm also challenging like that whole model of what can reasonably happen with 600 students in a classroom, or in my former colleague's case, 200. How do we do this at scale? And so what we've done is, it's just a very different model where we hire all kinds of people from all over North America to facilitate these small groups of about 20.
Yeah. Actually, my former boss at Tesla is now working on a startup that's like trying to use AI to like kind of offload the burden of like, teaching these humongous classes. Like the idea is that like, with AI, like you could potentially make personalized learning easier. Um, Although, it's still really early and, I wouldn't trust an AI to automate anything that a teacher is doing.
No, but it is
Moment,
an
but
interesting point. Like, some people are arguing that learning will become much more individualized, right? That we'll move away from that mass production model that's predominated into more individualized, and that it would be your sort of AI tutor, your personalized tutor. Like you, I'm a tad skeptical, but it's a brave new world, and it seems to be here already.
Yeah. And I mean, we talk about cognitive offloading and academic integrity all the time. And this is just kind of like a new way of offloading potentially. It's like, okay, like, can we look at the role of the educator in the 600-person classroom and look at all of the incidental things that they're doing versus the essential things that they're doing? And like, how much of those like incidental things can we take away with AI potentially?
Well, or even other forms of technology. I mean, I see myself, I see my kids. If you want to learn something, like think of the last time you tried to do a task at home, and maybe didn't know how to do it, whether it was to cook a new dish or to fix an appliance. What do? You go to YouTube. Or maybe you ask AI now. I don't know. My son probably would. He uses AI in his business extensively. But YouTube, right? You have a question and then you click through till you find the video where the person is speaking in a way that you can understand, and you stop and you restart, go over that thing again. So people are expecting just-in-time learning. You have a question, you have a problem, you have a moment of intrigue, you want to learn more about that. What do you reach out to? So I think these are the kinds of questions that higher education leaders really need to be asking themselves: is what is the role of the degree? What is the role of higher education in a world where information is at people's fingertips? Not necessarily information that's trustworthy, but information is ubiquitous. So what are the skills that people need to do to discern, to apply, and to have impact?
Absolutely. And I think this also ties into like how AI is really amazing at some things and really poor at others. And like I think like the things that AI is poor at, those are the things that are going to become the essential skills that need to be embedded into our education system, right? And one thing that AI is great at is large scale factual recall. Like, we don't actually need our doctors to be memorizing the encyclopedia of drugs and diseases anymore. We need them to be thinking about how to take something that, maybe hasn't been seen before and kind of use their synthesis of everything that they've learned in order to figure it out. But we don't need them to be like, we don't need to be testing them on this like crazy amount of memorization and recall because it's no longer an essential skill. So I think like hopefully like we think about, okay, like where is AI great? Where are humans great? And like, how can we mold those skills? How can we mold the skills that we're teaching our students?
So I agree with you with one small caveat. So I would
Sure.
say absolutely. I'm a big believer in this notion of human skills, right? And that empathy and exploration and emotional, intelligent leaders, all of that. But I would say I still believe there is a place in the school system for some rote learning. So I just want to do that caveat. To be a fully competent professional, I believe there's a vocabulary that you just have to know. You're in the middle of that meeting. Somebody uses a word you don't know that you should know. You don't have time to look it up on your phone, right? To be the active participant at the table. One of my former colleagues called this walk around knowledge or walk around competence, right? There is a vocabulary, there are concepts, there are experiences that you need to have had to be fully competent, like in a particular domain. But I absolutely agree with you, Bradley, that there's lots that we used to do that was entirely rote that does not need to be anymore, because there are those times when it's entirely appropriate that you do that quick search and remind yourself of what part that is of the body or something.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this when you said that, my brain immediately went to like language learning because I'm like, okay, like I'm not going to be holding up my Google Translate in front of me like when I'm talking to somebody. Like there really is a lot of value in like just actually knowing those words real time and being able to communicate with somebody without having to do the Translate app. Even
Exactly.
though most academics consider machine translation to be a solved problem.
Well, I'll tell you, I just got back from India and Vietnam, and I was absolutely intrigued to see everywhere I went, Google Translate on full display. It certainly has the power to bring folks from different cultures and language bases together.
Oh,
Fantastic.
absolutely.
Yeah. This is we're getting to time. It's gone by so fast. All right. So Bradley, one last question, and then I'll close out with my question.
Oh no, go for it, Alvin.
You good? Okay. Juliet, thanks so much again for your time. This has been great. So, last question that we're asking everyone is, what do you see as the future of academic integrity?
Okay, so I want to start with a quote, and I might have shared this the last time I was on your show, so apologies if this is a repeat, but this fellow Thomas Lacona wrote a book called Educating for Character, and he quoted Roosevelt as saying, "To educate a person in mind and not in morals is to educate a menace to society." And I love that quote. And I believe that the future of higher education has to reclaim some grounding. I think higher education decided at a certain point that education was values neutral. And I don't believe that at all. We know that young people are still developing their moral compass as they come into higher education institutions. And I think we've done a real disservice to those young folks when we have an anything goes. It's your personal opinion or it's your personal belief. That I do believe there are core values that all of humanity needs to embrace. And that's why for me, for us to have our signature learning outcomes that include notions of professional ethics and integrity is absolutely central. I am worried, and again, back to the Wall Street Journal article I mentioned prior, is saying, where has the concept of character gone? Whether it's in our elected, our elected officials, whether it's heads of corporation, why is it that celebrity culture has taken hold, and or how much money, like why is wealth revered over character? And so I really worry about Western society when all of those things are valued over who you are as a person. Are you someone of integrity? Are you someone of character? Can people trust you? Is your word your word? Do you care about others and things, over yourself? Are you trying to have a life of meaning and positive impact? And I worry about where Western society is going. I really feel we've lost our way a bit. And I would just encourage all higher education institutions to think about what their students are really learning and what they need to learn to have a positive impact on society.
Wow. Very powerful words. I think about might not have a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old, two girls, and I always talk about integrity. That's so important part of their character. All these words that you mentioned.
And
So
incredibly relevant too with all of the stuff that's going on with,
yeah,
our country's fight with higher education right now. And, I think like it's largely a fight over values. Like it really is. And hopefully you guys are a little bit more okay over there in Canada. But yeah, it's really scary. And I think yeah, we have a lot of figuring out to do.
Okay, but then let me add one last point. We've never expected faculty to facilitate values development, perhaps outside Bradley, your philosophy department. I'm not sure, but how do we? To me, this is the one that keeps me up at night. Is as if you accept some of my arguments that higher education has to shift to facilitating skills development, to facilitating values development. Where do the faculty come from to do that work if they haven't been prepared to do it? So this is why I think we have such a disruption ahead of us here, because I do worry if we don't successfully make this shift, that higher education will be perceived as increasingly irrelevant to the organizations that want to hire particular types of talent.
Yeah. Again, a powerful message, amazing questions, things to make you go, I don't know if you remember that song, but but I wanna outro my co-host with the most, who asks the fantastic questions as usual. He is Bradley Emmy. He's CTO and co-founder at Pangram Labs. Bradley, thank you as always.
Thanks so much, Elvin.
Absolutely. And I want to outro the greatest academic integrity guru that we've met so far. One of the greatest. She is Dr. Julia Christensen Hughes, and she's president and vice chancellor of Yorkville University. Julia, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much. As I said, one of my favorite things to talk about. I love the questions, and thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, you've just ed up.
Thank you for listening. This episode is part of our Academic Integrity series, sponsored by Pangram Labs, the world's leading AI detection technology. Try it out at pangram.com. That's PANGRAM.com.